Hey kiddos, so we're back again, different day, different recording, and we're going to move through chapters 9 through 11 today. And so grab your book, because remember, I want you following along with me as we go ahead and go through this. And today our focus is going to be on text to self. Now, we've talked a lot about that. You guys are experts at making inferences at this point. You have learned how to kind of put yourself in the character's position and ask yourself, how would I feel if I was going through that? So that's kind of what we're going to do today. So when we talk about text to self, it's all about making a connection to the character, to the setting, to anything that's going on in the book. So I want you to kind of be asking yourself, what happens in the text that you have background knowledge of? Now remember, background knowledge is knowledge about you, your experiences, your life, what you've gone through, how you've been thinking, acting, feeling, and speaking because of certain things. And so a good way to kind of start off is to say something like, this reminds me of blank. So as I'm reading to you today and you think to yourself like, oh, that reminds me blank, that's a great text to self connection. So this is going to be our essential question for today. What is happening to Stanley that you can relate to? What's going on in Stanley's life? How is he thinking, acting, feeling, or speaking? What's he going through? What's the setting that you have background knowledge of, that you can relate to? This reminds me of. So let's recap what we know so far. This week, we've made some pretty good headway in our book. We know that Stanley Yelnats is our character. We know that we are in a third-person point of view book, but we know it's told through Stanley's perspective. And we know that Stanley's got a problem, right? Stanley's been convicted of this crime of stealing Clyde Sweetfeet's shoes. They fell from the sky. Stanley didn't do it, but he gets convicted, goes to this camp for what they say bad boys, right? And they said if you dig a hole every day, that it'll turn you into a good boy. So what we're going to kind of see today is we've already seen Stanley dig his first hole. Now we're going to see what kind of camp life is like for Stanley and the things that he's having to go through with all these boys and living in this uncertain place. And so you're going to have an opportunity to really think of things that you can relate to with Stanley. So remember, while we're reading today, what is happening to Stanley that you can relate to? Okay, so we are on page 43. Okay, I'd love it if you would follow along with me today. Because you're a graphic organizer, I'm actually going to go ahead and kind of show you this. Is going to ask you to make connections. It says what happened in the text. So you're going to have to give, it doesn't have to be word for word, but it does need to be, a summary of what you read in the text. And then down there you'll say my connection, and you can start with this reminds me of. So while I'm reading to you today, I think it would be a really good idea for you to follow along with me. And if any point in time you hear me say something that you're like, oh, this reminds me of, boom, pause this video, go to the next slide, work on your graphic organizer, come back to me, and we can keep listening. Okay, you got to make two connections today. So two things that you can relate to. All right, we're on page 43, chapter 9. Let's get started. Stanley stood in the shower and let the cold water pour over his hot and sore body. Remember, he's just dug his first hole. It was 4 minutes of heaven. For the second day in a row, he didn't use soap. He was just too tired. There was no roof over the shower building, and the walls were raised up 6 inches off the ground, except in the corners. There was no drain in the floor. The water ran out under the walls and evaporated quickly in the sun. He put on his clean set of orange clothes. He returned to his tent, put his dirty clothes in his crate, and got out his pen and box of stationery and headed to the rec room. A sign on the door said rec room. Now, if you're following along with me, you'll notice that they spell rec 2 different ways there. REC stands for recreation, like a hangout room. This is where we shoot pool, watch TV, hang out. And then the sign on the door says WRECK, wreck, as in I'm gonna wreck it, I'm gonna mess it up. And I want you to think, why do those signs say 2 different things? Okay, I want you to pay attention. Nearly everything in the room was broken. The TV, the pinball machine, the furniture, even the people looked broken, with their worn out bodies sprawled over the various chairs and sofas. X-Ray and Armpit were playing pool. The surface of the table reminded Stanley of the surface of the lake. It was full of bumps and holes because so many people had carved their initials into the felt. There was a hole in the far wall and an electric fan had been placed in front of it. Cheap air conditioning. At least the fan worked. As Stanley made his way across the room, he tripped over an outstretched leg. "Hey, watch it," said an orange lump in a chair. "You watch it," muttered Stanley, too tired to care. "What'd you say?" the lump demanded. "Nothing," said Stanley. The lump rose. He was almost as big as Stanley and a lot tougher. "You said something." He poked his fat finger in Stanley's neck. "What'd you say?" A crowd quickly formed around them. "Be cool," said X-Ray. He put his hand on Stanley's shoulder. "You don't want to mess with the caveman," he warned. "The caveman's cool," said Armpit. "I'm not looking for trouble," Stanley said. "I'm just tired, that's all." The lump grunted. X-Ray and Armpit led Stanley over to a couch. Squid slid over to make some room, and Stanley sat down. "Did you see the caveman back there?" X-Ray asked. "The caveman's one tough dude," said Squid, and he lightly punched Stanley's arm. Stanley leaned back against the torn vinyl upholstery. Despite his shower, his body still radiated heat. "I wasn't trying to start anything," he said. The last thing he wanted to do after killing himself all day on the lake was get in a fight with a boy called Caveman. He was glad X-Ray and Armpit had come to his rescue. "Well, how'd you like your first hole?" asked Squid. Stanley groaned, and the other boys laughed. They've all been there, right? They've all had that first hole. "Well, the first hole's the hardest," said Stanley. "No way," said X-Ray. "The second hole's a lot harder. You're hurting before you even get started. If you think you're sore now, just wait and see how you feel tomorrow morning, right?" You guys ever done that before? Like, if those of you who like play sports, you had a really hard practice and you're like, "Oh, I'm so sore," and then you go to bed and wake up the next morning and you're even more sore than you were the night before, right? That's definitely happened to me. Oop, what did I just do there? I made a text to self connection. "That's right," said Squid. "Plus, the fun's gone," said X-Ray. "The fun?" asked Stanley. "Don't lie to me," said X-Ray. "I bet you always wanted to dig a big hole, right? Am I right?" Stanley had never really thought about it before, but he knew better than to tell X-Ray he wasn't right. "Every kid in the world wants to dig a big, great hole," said X-Ray. "To China, right? You guys ever said that? Let's dig a hole to China?" "Right," said Stanley. "See what I mean?" said X-Ray. "That's what I'm saying. But now the fun's gone, and you still got to do it again and again and again." "Camp Fun and Games," said Stanley. "What's in the box?" asked Squid. Stanley had forgotten that he brought it. Paper. I was going to write a letter to my mother." "Your mother?" laughed Squid. "She'll worry if I don't." Squid scowled. Remember, scowl's like a bad frown, right? Like kind of like an angry face. Stanley looked around the room. Why do you think that Squid is scowling? Why is he making an angry face when Stanley's talking about writing a letter to his mom? You know, why would that be Squid's reaction? What does that tell us about maybe Squid and his background knowledge? Stanley looked around the room. This was the one place in the camp where the boys could enjoy themselves. And what they do, they'd wrecked it. The glass on the TV was smashed as if someone had put his foot through it. Every table and chair seemed to be missing at least one leg. Everything leaned. He waited to write the letter until after Squid had gotten up and joined the game of pool. "Dear Mom, today was my first day at camp, and I've already made some friends. We've been out on the lake all day, so I'm pretty tired. Once I pass the swimming test, I'll get to learn how to water ski. Is Stanley telling the truth to his mom? I want you to ask yourself, why is Stanley lying to his mom? And then what does that tell you about Stanley's character, okay? He stopped writing because he'd become aware that somebody was reading over his shoulder. He turned to see Zero standing behind the couch. "I don't want her to worry about me," he explained. Zero said nothing. He just stared at the letter with a serious, almost angry look on his face. So this is the second time he's getting an angry look when the boys in his camp find out that he's writing a letter to his mom. Stanley slipped it back into the stationery box. "Did the shoes have red X's on the back?" Zero asked him. It took Stanley a moment, but then he realized that Zero was asking about Clyde Livingston's shoes. Yeah, they did, he said. He wondered how Zero knew that. Brand X was a popular brand of sneakers. Maybe Clyde Livingston had made a commercial for him. Zero stared at him for a minute with the same intensity which he had been staring at the letter. Stanley poked his finger through a hole in the vinyl couch and pulled out some of the stuffing. He wasn't even aware that he was doing it. Come on, caveman, dinner, said Armpit. You coming, caveman? Stanley looked around to see that Armpit and Squid were talking to him. So they were not calling that lump on the couch caveman. They were, who are they calling caveman? Sure, he said. He put the piece of stationery back in the box, then got up and followed the boys out to the tables. The lump wasn't the caveman, he was. He shrugged his left shoulder. It was better than Barf Bag. So how do you think that makes Stanley feel? He's got a nickname now, right? All the boys have nicknames, except Zero. And surely Zero's not his real name, but even Mr. Pendanski calls Zero Zero. But all the other boys have nicknames, and now Stanley has one. So how do you think that makes Stanley feel? Is that something that you can relate to? Okay, if you can, pause, tell me about it. I'm on chapter 10, page 48, if you're following along with me. Stanley had no trouble falling asleep, but morning came much too quickly. Every muscle and joint in his body ached as he tried to get out of bed. He didn't think it was possible, but his body hurt more than it had the day before. It wasn't just his arms and back, but his legs, ankles, and waist also hurt. The only thing that got him out of bed was knowing that every second he wasted meant he was 1 second closer to the rising sun. He hated the sun. Sorry, kiddos. Okay. He could hardly lift his spoon during breakfast, and then he was out on the lake, his spoon replaced by a shovel. He found a crack in the ground and began his second hole. He stepped on the shovel blade and pushed on the very back of the shaft with the base of his thumb. This hurt less than holding the shaft with his blistered fingers. As he dug, he was careful to dump the dirt far away from his hole, because remember last time he had to move dirt 3 times, and he's not making that mistake again. He needed to save the area around the hole for when the hole was much deeper. He didn't know if he'd ever get that far. X-ray was right. The second hole was the hardest. It would take a miracle. As long as the sun wasn't out yet, he removed his cap and used it to help protect his hands. Once the sun rose, he would have to put it back on his head. His neck and forehead had been badly burned the day before. He took it one shovelful at a time and tried not to think of the awesome task that lay ahead of him. Now, do you think the author means awesome as like, this is awesome? Or do you think awesome as in like, this is a really big task? Which one do you think he probably means here? After an hour or so, his sore muscles seemed to loosen up a little bit. He grunted as he tried to stick his shovel into the dirt. His cap slipped out from under his fingers and the shovel fell free. He let it lie there. He took a drink from his canteen. He guessed that the water trucks would be coming soon, but he didn't finish all the water, just in case he was wrong. He learned to wait until he saw the truck before drinking the last drop. The sun wasn't up yet, but its rays arced over the horizon and brought light to the sky. He reached down to pick up his cap, and there next to it, he saw a wide, flat rock. As he put his cap on his head, he continued to look down at the rock. He picked it up. He thought he could see the shape of a fish fossilized in it. He rubbed off some dirt, and the outline of the fish became clear. The sun peeked out over the horizon, and he could actually see tiny lines where every one of the fish bones had been. He looked at the barren land all around him. True, everyone referred to this area as the lake, but it was still hard to believe that this dry wasteland was once full of water. Then he remembered what Mr. Sir and Mr. Pendanski had both said. If he dug up anything interesting, he should report it to one of them. If the warden liked it, he'd get the rest of the day off. He looked back down at his fish. He found a miracle. He continued to dig, though very slowly, as he waited for the water truck. He didn't want to bring attention to his find, afraid that one of the other boys might try to take it from him. He tossed the rock face down beside his dirt pile, as if it had no special value. A short while later, he saw the cloud of dirt heading across the lake. The truck stopped and the boys lined up. They always lined up in the same order, Stanley realized, no matter who got there first. X-ray was always at the front of the line. Then came armpit, squid, zigzag, magnet, and zero. Stanley got in line behind zero. He was glad to be at the back so no one would notice the fossil. His pants had very large pockets, but the rock still made a bulge. Mr. Pendanski filled each boy's canteen until Stanley was the only one left. "I found something," Stanley said, taking it out of his pocket. Mr. Pendanski reached for Stanley's canteen, but Stanley handed him the rock instead. "What's this?" "It's a fossil," said Stanley. "See the fish?" Mr. Pendanski looked at it again. "See, you can even see all its little bones," added Stanley. "Interesting," said Mr. Pendanski. "Let me have your canteen." Stanley handed it to him. Mr. Pendanski filled it, then returned it. "So, do I get the rest of the day off?" "What for?" "You know, you said if I found something interesting, the warden would give me the day off." Mr. Pendanski laughed as he gave the fossil back to Stanley. "Sorry, Stanley, the warden isn't interested in fossils." "Let me see that," said Magnet, taking the rock from Stanley. Stanley continued to stare at Mr. Pendanski. "Hey, Zig, dig this rock." "Cool," said Zigzag. Stanley saw his fossil being passed around. "I don't see nothing," said X-Ray. He took off his glasses, wiped them on his dirty clothes, and put them back on. "See, look at the little fishy," said Armpit. So, if the warden isn't interested in fossils, what could the